question him. Wisely, he chose to avoid them, and still mourning the loss of his family, he set out on a wanderlust throughout Europe and beyond. Some believe this was a period of psychic awakening.
One of the legends of Nostradamus's psychic abilities occurred when he was traveling in Italy. And he came upon a group of Italian monks, and to one of them he went up to and said, "Father."
The monk was a Franciscan called Felice Peretti. Nostradamus fell to his knees and paid homage to the lowly friar, explaining that he must kneel at the feet of His Holiness the Pope. Indeed, in 1585, the young monk became Pope Sixtus V, fulfilling the prediction of Nostradamus. Nostradamus did not stay in Italy, but chose to broaden his search for knowledge.
This was the time frame that he may have tapped back into his earlier childhood education of going to the ancient places of divination, the ancient mystery schools in Greece, in Turkey, and also particularly in Egypt. And we know that after, when he returned to France, he brought with him many of the different tools of divination.
Upon his return to the south of France, Nostradamus took up residence in Salon de Provence, and here, in 1550, began to publish farmers' almanacs that included predictions for the future.
I think that Nostradamus saw a sterling opportunity to start turning out almanacs, which were astrological predictions one after the other for the coming year. They'd be published sometime in December, and people would snap them up. Well, printing had just been introduced in that part of the world, in Provence, and he took advantage of it, and apparently he made himself a good deal of money publishing almanacs.
But at night, the seer of Provence sat alone upstairs in his secret study and began to cultivate his famous visions of the future.
The wand in the hand is placed in the middle of the legs of the tripod. He sprinkles both the hem of his robes and his foot with water. A voice, fear. He trembles in his robes. Divine splendor. The gods sit down beside him. Nostradamus, 1555.
Most of the work that Nostradamus did in his divination, he did at night. And he lit candles throughout the upper floor of the room, which was his laboratory, you might say. And he filled the brass bowl with water. He then passed the wand over the bowl, and by moving a vibration across the surface of the water, this helped to open the veils of time.
By looking at the reflection, he would go into trance. And by doing so, he would travel out of his body and into the future, into time. This is how he would see the visions that he saw. He would see them occurring one after the other in all their horror, not knowing what they represented, not knowing what time period he was looking at. But when he came back into his body, maybe as long as 2 hours later, he would find that he had written a 4-line poem, the quatrain.
Nostradamus wrote 1,000 quatrains, dividing them into 10 groups of 100 each, which he called centuries. He wrote in his native French, but to protect himself from the superstitious witch hunters of the day, he obscured the verse with Latin and Greek and even anagrams. The first edition of his Centuries was published in 1566 and continues to be published to this day.
The publication of the Centuries brought him such attention, particularly from royalty, that he began to get commissions for horoscopes being cast, specific questions about families and futures being answered. It was quite a roaring business.
Nostradamus's predictions caught the attention of Catherine de' Medici, the reigning queen of France. Her interest in the occult and astrology was known throughout Europe.
After the first edition of Les Vraies Sorceries was released, she immediately summoned him to the French court. And while he was there, she commissioned him to do a prophetic reading on all of her children.
Nostradamus passed each of the queen's 7 sons by his magic mirror.
Very often, by looking into the mirror, he could not only catch an image of what the character of the person was now in the present moment, but could tell what the character of that person was going to be, what was their destiny line within their future life.
Nostradamus pronounced that 4 of them would die, leaving only 3. History proved his prediction to be correct.
The 7 branches will be reduced to 3.
As obscure as these verses sound to many of us, they were very clear to others. Nostradamus's 35th quatrain of the 1st century was immediately seized upon as suggesting that the reigning king of France, Henry II, would die in a jousting tournament.
The young lion will overcome the old one in single combat. In a cage of gold, his eyes will be put out. 2 wounds in one, then to die a cruel death.
The fatal accident occurred in the summer of 1559, as the king celebrated his daughter's wedding with a joust. He would ride against Count Montgomery, the captain of his Scottish Guard.
They lined up on the lists. The horses galloped down, flinging sawdust and earth. There was stillness, thousands of eyes looking. There was a sudden crack, followed by thousands of gasping voices, as they saw a huge splinter protruding out of the golden visor of the king's helmet. He fell to the ground, carried off, mortally wounded. The shaft had entered just behind his left eye, instantly blinding it, plunging deep into his brain. He suffered in agony for 10 days, slowly dying from infections.
The young lion will overcome the old one in single combat.
Every point of the prophecy came true. The young lion against the old lion. In fact, they were in a field of single combat. In other words, it is a tournament, a joust.
In a cage of gold, his eyes will be put out. 2 wounds in one, then to die a cruel death.
2 wounds made one. The eye is blinded, the brain is pierced. 2 wounds made one. And he was blinded as the splinter did plunge through the gold cage of his helmet.
In Nostradamus' time, it was believed that only witches and heretics could see through time. To claim clairvoyance was heresy against the church. On the night of the king's death, a crowd gathered in front of the Inquisition, demanding that Nostradamus be burned. That night, Count Montgomery was heard to exclaim,
"Cursed be the Divine One, who predicted it so evilly and so well."
As a favorite of Catherine de' Medici, Nostradamus was spared.
Catherine's interest in Nostradamus was such that when she and the new King of France, Charles IX, her son, mounted the throne, they actually made a tour of France, covered every major city in the entire kingdom. When they came to Salon, they asked to meet Nostradamus personally.
As we were passing through Salon, we have seen Nostradamus, who has promised to my son King Charles IX long life. Catherine de' Medici, 1564.
Though favored by the Queen, Nostradamus still continued to obscure his written predictions against persecution by the Inquisition.
Although I have often foretold, long before what hath afterwards come to pass, I was willing to hold my peace. But afterwards,